Truth Espresso, episode 315.
He's promising a bloodbath.
A bloodbath.
If he loses in his word.
Donald Trump has openly vowed if reelected, he'll be a dictator on day one.
A dictator on day one.
All he said was, it's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach into your arm. You'll be all right.
Just inject a little bleach in your arm.
Americans aren't stupid. He was talking about a bloodbath. Sometimes a bloodbath means a bloodbath.
Americans aren't stupid.
Hello there. Welcome to Truth Espresso. This is your host, Daniel Minnick, for yet another exciting episode of the Truth Espresso podcast here on the Christian podcast community hosted by Striving for Eternity Ministries. If you're just tuning in to this episode, this is part 3 of Did Trump Really Say That? And this is a little series going over some of the hoaxes surrounding things that Trump said, particularly looking at things that he actually said and then examining how what he said is being presented in the media to get people to think that he meant something that perhaps he did not actually mean. So the last 2 weeks were parts 1 and 2. And so if you haven't listened to those, I would highly recommend it so that you can get the full spectrum of debunked hoaxes about what Trump actually said, from the Charlottesville hoax to the inject bleach in your arm hoax. It's all there. And for this episode, we're going to look at 2 more hoaxes related to what Trump said, and I think that there are even some more after this, so there could be yet a part 4 of Did Trump Really Say That? And this series was actually inspired by a coworker who sits next to me, so we end up in lots of dialogues about politics and faith. And he brought up the topic of Trump's debate with Kamala Harris, and the idea was that Trump said lots of lies, but Kamala Harris didn't, and I challenged him on that by first bringing up the Charlottesville very fine people hoax, and he did not believe it was a hoax, so he had to listen for himself, and I am not sure if he was convinced, because I don't think he listened enough to what Trump actually said. But because of that, and the fact that there are still possibly millions of people in this divided country of ours, the United States, I know that there are listeners of Truth Espresso who don't live in the United States, so I don't want to exclude you from the Truth Espresso audience, but most listeners are in the United States, and so it's kind of scary when you think about it, that there could be millions of people living in the United States who believe something that can be easily disproven, and the reason they believe it is because they read or listen to or watch mainstream media sources tell them things, report on things that Trump said and add their spin to it, and these turn into hoaxes that just never die. So what do we have in store for this episode? Well, I would like to begin analyzing the Proud Boys Stand Back and Stand By hoax. Now, once again, when I refer to it as a hoax, I don't mean that Trump did not utter the words stand back and stand by in reference to a group who call themselves the Proud Boys. What I mean is that it's a hoax in how the media has spun it and what they present as that meaning from Trump. The claim is that Trump refused to condemn white nationalist groups, and that the words stand back and stand by were somehow ominously orders to this group, as if they were people at Trump's command, that they follow orders that he gives them. Maybe some of these orders are given in code, but it's like they're his henchmen. And so when he says stand back and stand by, he's giving them kind of marching orders. So what we're going to do is look at the original place where Trump said that and see how this has been reported and how it's evolved over time. So it started with one of the debates between Donald Trump and Joe Biden in the 2020 election. And so on September 29th, we have this segment of the debate, and we will ask ourselves the question, was Trump telling a militia group called the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by in a blatant refusal to condemn white supremacists?
You have repeatedly criticized the vice president for not specifically calling out Antifa and other left-wing extremist groups. But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm
prepared
willing to do
specifically
that,
do it?
Well, go ahead, sir.
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it.
Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
Who would
white
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud
militia.
Boys, stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing.
FBI director
This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacists. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got to be
not
kidding.
militia. That's what his
It's an idea.
FBI director
Gentlemen,
said.
Well, then,
So when we listen to this clip, we can observe some things. First, why is the moderator of a presidential debate trying to prod a candidate to do or to say something? I mean, this seems kind of like a truth or dare type of situation. Is that the job of the moderator? And why are the moderator and the other candidate joined at the hip, urging Trump to say or to do something? What happened to a debate moderator being unbiased, at least in how he or she handles the debate? Now, it's probably impossible for someone to be unbiased in a political position, but a debate moderator can act and handle the debate itself in an unbiased way. But that doesn't seem like the way Chris Wallace handled this. And particularly in this particular segment, it was kind of like, when are you going to stop beating your wife type of question. It's trying to put Trump on the defense, trying to blame him for things so that Trump has to prove his innocence. So Chris Wallace asked Trump if he would condemn white nationalist groups and tell them to stand down. So he told Trump, are you willing to tell them to stand down? Now that's key to understanding Trump's words. Trump said that he's willing to do that. And then Wallace and Biden prodded him to do it. Trump asked Wallace, what do you want me to call them? It seemed that Trump was willing to go along with this. I mean, Trump probably seemed like it was kind of a petty question, but it's like, hey, if people need this, what do you want me to do? And I'll do it. You know, can we get this out of the way? Trump wasn't even sure what groups they were talking about. They both then mentioned the Proud Boys. So Trump said, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. It seems obvious that this was his affirmative answer to Wallace's question if he was willing to tell extremist groups to stand down and not add to the violence. Trump said that he was willing to condemn white nationalists. He likely wasn't familiar with the names of some of these groups, yet Trump did what Wallace asked, protestations to the contrary notwithstanding. Now, the hoax is that Trump refused to condemn white nationalists. This is simply nitpicking his answer. It was kind of a fast-paced flurry of two-on-one here, as often seems to be the case when it comes to debates. usually the moderators side with the Democrat, and then so it's the Republican has to argue with the Democrat opponent and the moderator. We saw that kind of with Trump's debate with Kamala Harris. Now, Trump said he was willing to condemn white supremacists, and just because he didn't say, okay, I hereby condemn any and all white nationalist groups, doesn't mean that Trump refused to condemn them. He asked, what would you like me to call them? He seemed to be willing to evaluate whatever name or label would be offered. Now, I think he also didn't want to just jump the gun because, the moderator and Biden might try to bait and switch by merely giving him the name of a harmless group of supporters with which Trump might be unfamiliar. And then if he were to condemn them, you can see the headlines reading the next day, Trump condemns his own grassroots supporters. Ha 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 ha. So Trump was trying to be careful. He was trying to ask them, name a group, what do you want me to call them? And then he would think of how he can do the affirmative to the challenge. Trump had a point to make. In this segment of the debate, most of the violence that had been happening for months came from Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioters in what has since been nicknamed the Summer of Love. So you listened to that clip, and then we'll see if what you heard, without reading or hearing any other report about it, but just from what you heard from the video, let's see how it was reported. Well, the next day, a reporter asked Trump at an impromptu moment about his comment to the Proud Boys in the debate the previous day. And this is his response.
I don't know who the Proud Boys are. I mean, you'll have to give me a definition because I really don't know who they are. I can only say they have to stand down, let law enforcement do their work. Law enforcement will do the work more and more. As people see how bad this radical liberal Democrat movement is and how weak, the law enforcement's going to come back stronger and stronger. But again, I don't know who Proud Boys are, but whoever they are, they have to stand down. Let law enforcement do their work.
So Trump says that he doesn't know who the Proud Boys are, that you have to give him a definition because he doesn't know who they are. And he repeated what he said, I can only say they have to stand down, let law enforcement do their work, which is precisely what Chris Wallace wanted him to say. Basically, now that he was asked to condemn white nationalists, and he had done that before with the Charlottesville thing, although he's not given credit for that. He explicitly said that the white nationalists and the neo-Nazis should be condemned totally. And he's doing, just as Chris Wallace asked him, would he be willing to tell the white supremacist groups to stand down and not add to the violence? Then that's what he said. They have to stand down, let law enforcement do their work. Now, in a YouTube video from Bloomberg Quick Take, it says in the summary, President Donald Trump claimed that he's unfamiliar with the Proud Boys, a right-wing vigilante group he advised to stand back and stand by during Tuesday's debate. An article from Axios on September 30th, the day after the debate, headlines, Trump says he doesn't know who Proud Boys are after telling them to stand by. And the article says, quote, President Trump told reporters on Wednesday that he doesn't know who the Proud Boys are after saying at the presidential debate last night that the far-right group should stand back and stand by in response to a question asking him to condemn white supremacists, unquote. So Biden brought up the Proud Boys. So remember, in the debate clip, he asked in response to Chris Wallace's question if he's willing to condemn white nationalist groups and tell them to stand down and not add to the violence. And Trump is asking, who do you want me to condemn? And then Biden brought up Proud Boys. Now, to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, Like, how could you prove otherwise? Remember the innocent until proven guilty thing. Trump said the next day that he didn't know who the Proud Boys are and that they have to give him a definition. So when someone brings up Proud Boys, it's perfectly reasonable that Trump actually didn't know who they were. So he's allowing them to know something that he doesn't know. Like, here's an example of an extremist group. He asked, who do you want me to condemn? Give me a name. They gave him a name, so he's giving them the benefit of the doubt. Okay, you named the Proud Boys, whoever they are. Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. And now, let me get to the point I want to make. Both Biden and Wallace demanded that Trump do it, condemn the Proud Boys. It's no proof that Trump knew who the Proud Boys were. He addressed them after a dare to condemn them. And now, because Biden and Wallace named the Proud Boys, Trump didn't know who they were, as he said the next day, but to satisfy the question, he addresses them. Just because after they told him to condemn the Proud Boys or tell them to stand down, and he goes along with it and tells them, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by, that's no proof that Trump knew who they were. It was kind of like, okay, I'll do whatever you want me to do. Can we move on to something of substance? Because I think there's things that are more important than the politics you're trying to pull here. There is absolutely no proof that at this time Trump knew who the Proud Boys were that I could find. Apparently, then the Proud Boys enjoyed the fact that Trump mentioned them in a national debate there, so they took that as a badge of honor, the call out there. So what? The claim is that these people answer to Trump. The idea seems to evolve that Trump gives orders to militia groups as if he calls them into action and tells them to halt as needed. Of course, if Trump says he doesn't know who the Proud Boys are, we just have to assume he's lying because, well, Trump is just a white supremacist, so that's that. At least that's how the media want us to think of this. But plenty of well-known people have fans and fan groups of various ideas. How can someone be responsible for everyone who does something radical in his name? So remember, in the Bible, even Jesus told his disciples that people will do false things and deceive people in his name or in God's name. As we read in John 16, verse 2, Jesus told his disciples, "They shall put you out of the synagogues. Yea, the time cometh that whosoever killeth you will think that he doeth God service." In Matthew 24, verse 5, Jesus said, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." And we see in Jeremiah 14, verse 14, it says, "Then the Lord, Yahweh, said unto me, The prophets prophesy lies in my name. I sent them not, neither have I commanded them, neither spake unto them. They prophesy unto you a false vision and divination, and a thing of naught, and the deceit of their heart." So it's entirely possible that a group called the Proud Boys, who support Trump for reasons such that they would not support the Democrat candidate, can also have their own intentions and goals that don't align with Trump, and that Trump wouldn't know about these people. And just because he's dared in a debate to tell them and name the group for him and tell them to stand down, and Trump does just that, then it's like, see, that's proof that Trump orders these people around. I mean, it's just crazy, but when you have these ideas about Trump, then you're going to pile on the ideas one after the other as the comments come out that can be exploited. So let's see a PolitiFact article from September 30th, 2020, the night of the debate, where it's entitled, "In Context, Donald Trump's Stand Back and Stand By debate comments on white supremacists." And the PolitiFact article, which often is opinion and not fact, said, quote, Trump's comments, the stand back and stand by comments, harkened back to his remarks following the violent white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, which Biden had said contributed to his decision to run for president. And also, quote, Trump eventually condemned neo-Nazis after the event, but only after facing days of criticism for not doing so unequivocally at first, unquote. Yeah, so we have the whole Charlottesville hoax over and over and over again, and so because of the Charlottesville hoax, now we're allowed to believe the stand back and stand by hoax. So one good hoax deserves another, right? And now for the coup de grace of this particular hoax, claiming that Trump's stand back and stand by comments were basically militia orders to a group known as the Proud Boys that would eventually be orders for them to protest or do violence. Let's look at an article in The Guardian on January 6, 2021. Of course, we know what that date is, so we know what the article is about. So it's by Ed Pilkington, and it's entitled, Stand Back and Stand By, How Trumpism Led to the Capitol Siege. And so if you want to read this article, I'll provide a link to it in the show notes. And let me just say that it oozes rhetoric and connects the dots for how Trump supposedly orders a bunch of far-right groups to do stuff. And the article implies to the reader that Trump's stand back and stand by was an order directly to the Proud Boys to prepare for violence. The subheading for this article says, quote, the president spent 2020 enabling and encouraging mass displays of armed protest on the streets of American cities, unquote. So we endured riots and burning of cities and billions of dollars of damage throughout the summer of 2020 because of the death of an actual criminal. But somehow Trump, quote unquote, spent 2020 enabling and encouraging violence. Let's see how this article argues this and connects the dots between Trump's stand back and stand by to the Proud Boys and how all of that culminates in the January 6th event at the Capitol. The article says, quote, the storming of the U.S. Capitol by a pro-Trump mob on Wednesday was the culmination of a year of white nationalist and anti-democratic violence that steadily intensified and featured the direct indictment of the U.S. president, unquote. So, I wonder how many of you looked at 2020 and just saw that it was filled with all kinds of white nationalist violence. Hey, maybe I haven't looked at the news enough, but somehow I thought there was a lot more violence by other groups, and that's what Trump was trying to point out on the heels of the Summer of Love and the George Floyd riots. In the debate, trying to say that leftist groups did more of the violence. So the first example from the Guardian's article was that Trump's comment during the lockdowns to liberate Michigan allegedly spurred armed militia to storm the state capitol. So we're talking about a protest at the Michigan state capitol about lockdown policies. The article says, quote, his loyal followers dutifully responded, unquote. Gotta love the hardcore evidence of that one. Now, we know that Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer had some of the most brutal lockdown orders in the country, including banning the sale of gardening supplies at stores for no other reason than that some sort of fairness impulse. She said that, quote, if you're not buying food or medicine or other essential items, you should not be going to the store, unquote. So Governor Whitmer at the time basically wanted people to live in some sort of subsistence way. They couldn't even try to buy stuff to grow their own food. They had to be basically prisoners of the state, just going to the store to buy so-called essential items. Yeah, and we don't expect that kind of policy to cause people to do things out of desperation. I'm not defending any kind of desperation measures, but we can at least understand what would cause some people to do that when you're roping off in the stores unnecessarily just to make sure people buy their ramen noodles and head back home and stay locked in their homes. And the travel restrictions were ridiculous, where people couldn't even visit their ailing relatives. Oh, by the way, Trump's tweet was after the state capitol protest, not before. Trump's words didn't cause the protest because it was after the protest. So nice try, The Guardian. Now, the next line of evidence. White nationalist violence during the summer of 2020. Yes, you heard that right. The very notable violence from white nationalists. The article says, quote, when Black Lives Matter protests erupted across the U.S. in the wake of the police killing of George Floyd in May, the extremist groups turned their attention in that direction. Counter-protests ensued, climaxing in some instances of bloodshed, unquote. Notice the lack of specifics, or who died, or what the cause was. We could just simply look at the Summer of Love, and what we get out of things like the burning of Minneapolis is what the so-called right-wing extremists supposedly did. Yeah, remember the video of the reporter saying that the protests were mostly peaceful but fires have been started? All of that is just peaceful protesting, and then the white nationalist groups come into the picture and they're the troublemakers. Whatever bad some of them did, they weren't the ones burning down Minneapolis because of one person being killed who was actually a convicted criminal. So what else did Trump's foot soldiers allegedly do, according to The Guardian? Well, the article mentions that, quote, 2 protesters were killed and a third injured by Kyle Rittenhouse, unquote. Yes, Rittenhouse was eventually acquitted because it was clearly a self-defense situation. Those so-called protesters tried to attack him first. Oh yeah, and the article also says, quote, Trump himself could not bring himself to condemn the killings, unquote. Well, because they weren't murders. They were self-defense. Rittenhouse himself at the time said that he supported Black Lives Matter and peaceful protesting for their cause. Next line of evidence for Trump's words inciting violence? Well, the article then repeated the Charlottesville very fine people hoax. Yay for the Charlottesville hoax. For more information on that one, listen to part 1 in this series where we completely demolish that one. And next comes the hoax at hand, the stand back and stand by hoax. The article says, quote, Trump was similarly unable to condemn the neo-fascist Proud Boys during his presidential debate with Joe Biden in September, unquote. So I think it's really kind of a hoax to say that Trump was unable to condemn them. He tried to answer the question to the best of his ability that he said, and he probably thought it was ridiculous politicking at the time. And then the article says, quote, that refrain, the stand back and stand by, also now takes on a chilling new resonance in the wake of the scenes of carnage at the U.S. Capitol, unquote. So, we're supposed to believe that there is a direct link, or connecting the dots at least, between stand back and stand by and the riot at the U.S. Capitol. The article claims that the charges against those involved in the plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer extinguished any doubt about, quote, the danger of Trump's constant goading of extremist elements among his base, unquote. Now, we know from hindsight that the charges and the case against some of the men involved in this kidnapping plot proved difficult because that case smelled of FBI entrapment. But the article puts the blame on Trump when it says, quote, the Michigan governor had become a favorite target of Trump's invective, beginning with his "liberate" tweet and growing more menacing from there, unquote. How about that there were people suffering heavily under Whitmer's totalitarian lockdowns, and that kind of thing leads some people to take drastic measures? There is no reason to claim that Trump's mean tweets incited people to protest. Their own dire situations did. So we have an article from The Guardian connecting all kinds of dots to try to prove that stand back and stand by were basically orders to the Proud Boys that ultimately led them to following orders to commit violence in the riot at the U.S. Capitol. Now, after you listened to the actual clip in the debate, did you hear any of that? Did you hear anything about Trump seeming to give them orders? Or was it Trump simply being goaded into answering a question and trying to move on from that? Now, I know some people might not agree at this point, but I think it's quite obvious that I could say,
hoax busted.
Oh yeah, and
the Proud Boys made headlines recently after their planned rally in Portland on Saturday caused Oregon's governor to declare a state of emergency. Today, their chairman tells me they are not white supremacists. What does stand back and stand by mean?
To me, I think the most important thing was stand back, right?
What did that mean?
So to me, that meant, let police do their job.
Miami-Dade-based Proud Boy chairman Enrique Tarrio telling us he didn't take it as a call to action, tweeting the question was in reference to white supremacy, which we are not. Tarrio denies the organization hates any one group and told us they are not white supremacists.
I'm going to go ahead on the record and I'm going to tell you that I condemn white supremacist groups.
In the questionnaire to become a Proud Boys member, there is a question asking your thoughts on race-based politics. Tarrio says anyone that answers that in a questionable way is not allowed to join.
Are you living an abundant life? Jesus came to give us eternal life, yes, but also an abundant life here and now, overflowing with the fruit of the Spirit. The Abundant Life podcast encourages and challenges Christians to spiritual change and growth by applying biblical principles to everyday life. Podcast hosts Saso Mendez and Ben Ariano discuss various topics that are helpful for Christians and true to the Scripture, and bring a generous dose of humor. Visit abundantlife.fm and subscribe to get notified of each new episode. That's abundantlife.fm.
So, the second hoax for this episode is the Putin can do whatever he wants hoax. Now, I know Trump added words to that, and so as I'm playing clips of this or reading or whatever, there's going to be a mild swear word using HE double hockey sticks, and so every occurrence of that I am going to bleep it out. Now, it's not because I'm a prude, but for the purposes of Truthspresso here, and listeners are kids, I normally don't have any kind of swearing to any degree whatsoever on this podcast, and so I will just bleep out all uses of the expletive there. So what is this Putin can do whatever he wants hoax? The hoax is that Donald Trump is secretly, or not so secretly, a policy puppet of Russian oligarch Vladimir Putin, that Trump is essentially a Russian spy, and that his goals ultimately involve Putin being successful and maybe even supporting Putin taking over Ukraine, and possibly even supporting Putin expanding the boundaries of Russia into Europe. And Joe Biden, in his State of the Union speech on March 7th, 2024, had this to say.
Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, do whatever the hell you want. That's a quote. A former president actually said that, bowing down to a Russian leader. I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable.
So Biden says that's a quote. Well, not quite, Joe. Trump did not say to Putin, do whatever you want. And then Biden said that he was bowing down to a Russian leader. So what is Biden talking about? When did Trump say this? And of course, what was the context? So technically, Trump didn't tell Putin anything there in the referenced quote about do whatever you want. Supposedly, the leader of a NATO country asked Trump if he would protect them from a Russian attack if they don't meet their defense funding obligations, and Trump said that he wouldn't. And this was at a rally in Conway, South Carolina on February 10th, 2024. On this rally, part of it, Trump roughly detailed a conversation that he supposedly had with a leader of an unnamed NATO country, and it would have been one of those that wasn't paying enough, and we'll look at some information about that and NATO's structure to evaluate this.
I did the same thing with NATO. I got them to pay up. NATO was busted until I came along. I said, everybody's going to pay. They said, well, if we don't pay, are you still going to protect us? I said, absolutely not. They couldn't believe the answer. And everybody, you never saw more money pour in to Secretary General Stoltenberg. Well, I don't know if he is anymore, but he was my biggest fan. He said, all these presidents came in, they'd make a speech, they'd leave, and that was it. And they all owed money, and they wouldn't pay it. I came in, I made a speech, and I said, you got to pay up. They asked me that question. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills. And the money came flowing in. And Henry would know this. If I said, yes, I will, you don't have to pay. Yes, I will. Most politicians have said to that, yes, we will protect you under any circumstance. Well, then they're never paying up. I said, no, you have to understand, you don't pay your bills, you get no protection. It's very simple. Hundreds of billions of dollars came into NATO, and that's why they have money today, because of what I did. And then I hear that they like Obama better. They should like Obama better. You know why? Because he didn't ask for anything. We were like the stupid country of the world, and we're not going to be the stupid country of the world any longer. We're not going to be. Got bad under this guy.
So after just hearing that, did Trump say anything to Putin? No. Does it sound like Trump is bowing down to a Russian leader? No. What does it sound like to you? That Trump is a shrewd deal maker? I think that's a little more likely. And I'll provide a link in the show notes to a transcript of Trump's speech there, so you could even read everything he had to say here, but the linked video is good enough. Now, remember, Donald Trump is the man who wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. He is a shrewd deal maker, and he's successful at it. To get two sides to agree to a deal in which there is compromise and obligation, you cannot just appease and preserve the status quo if it's lopsided. So whoever this NATO country is that Trump doesn't name, and whoever this leader is, Trump is trying to get them to pay where he says they're delinquent. And he also says, and the money came flowing in. He said that hundreds of billions of dollars came into NATO. So, what is this all about? Well, if we can understand what Trump is talking about and why he said what he said, when we look at some of the articles of the NATO treaty itself and some of the statistics when it comes to member nations in NATO and how much they pay for their defense. So according to NATO documents, the goal of each member country since 2014 is to spend a minimum of 2% of their GDP on defense. And that sounds reasonably doable, right? So let's ask the question, why is there a moral and unwritten legal obligation for the United States in particular to subsidize most defense for all the other nations so that they can focus their budgets on social welfare programs? And then, of course, the leftists in the United States have the gall to bash our country and complain that we don't have as expansive a social welfare program. Like, why can't we do it like Sweden does? Why can't we do it like Norway does? Well, if Norway and Sweden paid as much in defense in NATO and other things, other international expenses, then maybe they wouldn't have as much of their own budget from their own income taxes to pay for their social welfare programs. So I'll provide a link in the show notes to the articles in the NATO treaty. You could read it for yourself. It takes probably just a few minutes to read the entire original NATO treaty. And so let's look at Articles 3, 4, and 5 in particular. Article 5 is the most referenced article, but it should be understood in light of Articles 3 and 4. So what does Article 3 say? It says, quote, "In order more effectively to achieve the objectives of this treaty, the parties separately and jointly, by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack," unquote. And then Article 4 of the treaty says, quote, "The parties will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of them, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the parties is threatened," unquote. And then, of course, Article 5 is the most cited one that talks about how any member would be willing to defend another member when it gets attacked. So it starts with, quote, "The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all," unquote. And there's more to it. And then Article 6 kind of explains or defines further what an armed attack looks like. But according to Articles 3 and 4, just as much as there is mutual aid, there is the requirement for self-help. Just as much as there should be collective capacity, there should be individual capacity to resist armed attack. Trump seemingly was trying to hold NATO members to the original spirit of the alliance more so than those who support globalist empire with the United States at the helm. It's interesting that the same idealists who want to hate on the United States and weaken it also want to continue to treat other member countries like their children. It is the responsibility of all members of NATO not only to provide mutual aid to each other, but also to have continuous and effective self-help and to have political independence and to develop their individual capacity to resist armed attack. Now, let's look at a Pew Research survey from 2016. I'll provide a link to that one in the show notes, but it seems to be one of the latest Pew Research surveys about how member nations of NATO view NATO favorably or unfavorably. According to the Pew Research survey, most member countries viewed NATO favorably, which I would expect for some reasons. Most of them are on the receiving end of its benefits. This Pew Research poll also shows that most countries want to keep their member spending levels the same and not change them much. This also makes sense because most countries get more out of NATO than how much they pay into it. It also makes sense for Spain to have the highest desire at 52% to maintain current spending levels because, well, Spain is one of the countries that contributes the lowest percentage of GDP toward NATO. And not to mention that an additional 33% in Spain surveyed want to spend even less on NATO. It's funny how that works out, right? We also see in the Pew Research survey that Greece is less favorable to NATO with 69% unfavorability and only 25% favorability. And that makes sense because Greece contributes much more for its weight compared to other members besides the United States. And yet we know that Greece doesn't have much sway over the direction of NATO. So Greece carries its own weight and doesn't view NATO as favorably as Spain, who contributes the least of all the countries, but they view NATO favorable because, hey, they get their benefits and they contribute the least toward it. It's funny how that works out, right? The United States is about 2/3 favorable. Now, although the United States contributes over half to about 2/3 of the total resources, NATO becomes like a de facto empire under United States control. So while American citizens are paying much more for NATO than citizens of other member nations, our leaders and the media have a vested interest in NATO. Therefore, they're going to pitch it as a healthy alliance and essential to staving back adversaries like Russia and China. So even though we carry more weight, it makes more sense for the average American to view NATO favorably. Now, obviously, this survey is a little outdated, but I don't think a whole lot has changed, even with the Russia-Ukraine war. According to USA Today, and I'll provide a link to this article, and it's from July 10th of this year, the United States is the top third spender on NATO as a percentage of GDP with 3.38%. Only Estonia and Poland top that. And it's interesting, those aren't like the major European countries. Now, remember, as far as total money, the U.S. spends far more than all the other members combined. Greece is fifth in spending with 3.08% of GDP. And that's well above the 2% floor, the goal that has been in place since 2014 for all members to contribute. Again, since Greece is definitely pulling its weight in NATO and doesn't control the NATO empire like the United States does, it's no wonder Greece has some unfavorable ratings for NATO compared to Spain at the bottom that contributes only 1.28% of GDP. And so Spain rather likes the way NATO works. Thank you very much. So, in light of what Trump really said in his deal making, and in light of the survey and the statistics we looked at, we can kind of see how Trump's being a shrewd deal maker, and he's trying to get those who have been lagging, taking the benefits, but lagging in their contributions. In light of that, you can see why Trump said what he did, and why some people actually understand why Trump did what he did. Now, it might seem a little over the top, but that's how Trump works to get things done. And now let's hear some more claims about what Trump said and why. On one video on YouTube from The Times and the Sunday Times, it has a small clip of the segment of what Trump said in the South Carolina rally. But the title of the video is Donald Trump says he would encourage Russia to attack NATO. That's The whole headline. No conditions, nothing. Don't you just love headlines? The headline says nothing about the deal that Trump was making and the results that he got. It's just, hey, Trump wants Russia to attack NATO countries. Fear the boogeyman. Here's another video title from the Evening Standard. Donald Trump says he warned NATO ally he would let Russia do whatever they want. Gotta love that lack of context. One comment under that video said, quote, Trump is not a politician, he is a businessman. That is how you negotiate a deal. You say basically whatever you have to say to seal the deal. He knew how to get the money out of them, and that is what he did, unquote. So it took a commenter to give the whole context and the truth against the lack of context and the implications in the headline of the video. Now, how about this one from WCNC? The headline says, Trump says he'd encourage Russia to do whatever the H they want. And? Of course, there's no and there. And one commenter doing due diligence under the video said, quote, again, you are a liar. You took every bit of that conversation out of text. That's not what he said. And he was telling a story. Why don't you ever get anything right? Unquote. Slow clap for that commenter. The Washington Post had the headline in an article that says, Trump says he'd disregard NATO treaty, urge Russian attacks on U.S. allies. Of course, the headline, because a lot of people will read headlines and then just groan and roll their eyes and not really read the article. And the headline is the news for some people, so that's what the media will do. They'll make the headline say what they want, and then they'll bury the contextual details deep in the article where no one's going to read them except people wanting to do due diligence. And that is, of course, if the article even wants to tell the whole truth. And I'll provide a link to that Washington Post article. Now notice the wording here, disregard NATO treaty. Where did Trump ever say that? That's their deceitful interpretation of Trump's deal-making. Remember what I read from the articles of the treaty itself. There are responsibilities both for individual nations to do their part and for the members to help each other. It's not supposed to be a lopsided welfare system. And the goal since 2014, we're talking about a whole decade for some member nations to get their act together, and several of them are far below that threshold of 2%. They're closer to 1% than 2%. What's taking them so long? Why is it so hard to meet that simple threshold? Where are their priorities? And that's what Trump was trying to do. Notice also the wording, urge Russian attacks on U.S. allies. This is deceitful language to make the reader say, yep, Trump is a Russian spy and a Putin puppet for sure. He shows his true colors yet again. No, how about it's shrewd deal-making to make countries do their part? Now, let's listen to a clip from Trump's debate with Harris to see if she includes the context or excludes it. And I'm sure you know where this is going to go.
It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the he wants and go into Ukraine.
So it is well known that he said of Putin he could do whatever he wants and go into Ukraine. Now, where did Trump mention Ukraine in this part of his rally in South Carolina? Do you remember? You could read the transcript. You can listen to it again if you want. It wasn't there. Remember, Ukraine is not, or not yet at least, a member of NATO. I assure you Trump wasn't talking to Zelensky when he said these words. It was one of those member countries that struggles to meet defense spending goal of 2% of national GDP. It could have been Spain, who knows? I don't want to criticize anyone or get people not to like countries or anything. That's not the point here. We're just smashing a hoax. According to Trump, if his recollection is in any way accurate, this leader wasn't even promising to try to reach the payment goal. It was just, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? According to Trump, after negotiating, he said, and the money came flowing in. Did Trump say that Putin could do whatever he wants to a NATO country because he wants Putin to beat NATO because he's Putin's puppet? No. You can't fault a lifelong businessman for treating NATO like a business partnership. Everyone needs to hold up their end of the contract. That's the way Trump thinks. His purpose wasn't that Putin would actually attack Spain or Luxembourg or what have you. It was to get the ally to do what it's supposed to do, period. It's the same shrewd deal-making that kept the U.S. out of any new wars during Trump's presidency. No Putin puppet accusation necessary. Now, whether or not you are a fan of Trump's boisterous and unhinged deal-making comments, consider this. Putin never invaded Ukraine under Trump's presidency. No new wars under Trump's first term. Remember the Abraham Accords and peace in the Middle East? Sometimes the brash way works. You have to realize Trump's intention is not for his remarks about negative consequences ever to happen. It's leverage. The intention is to make the right thing happen. Trump used the threat of massive tariffs, in fact, to get the leader of Mexico to enforce their border. The idea wasn't that he wanted the tariffs to happen, it's that he wanted Mexico to do their part to secure the border. And it's not that Trump wants Russia to threaten any country. It's that he wanted them to pay their part in the NATO treaty. So, enough of the fear-mongering, enough of the conspiracies that Trump is a Putin puppet or whatever. Enough with the idea that Trump wants Russia to expand or even beat our allies. When it comes to the Putin or Russia can do whatever he wants hoax, it was shrewd deal-making to get money to be paid and to get nations to be responsible. And when he said that, according to him, they did. No invasions necessary, no victory on Putin's part necessary. It's the art of the deal. So, did Trump say Putin could do whatever he wants? Or did Trump's words demonstrate that he favored Russian aggression? Or was it shrewd deal-making among his friends? I think we could say about this one as well.
Hoax busted.
And so that was a pretty long episode dealing with only 2 hoaxes, but they needed some context. And if you enjoyed this episode of Did Trump Really Say That? I highly recommend that you stay tuned for the next episode of Truthspresso, where we will tackle yet more Trump hoaxes. And God bless.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Truthspresso. Be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast app. Truthspresso is a member of the Christian podcast community. Check out other great faith-building shows at christianpodcastcommunity.org.